Welcome everybody to our Masterclass today about transforming your meeting culture. I'm James Chisholm, co-founder of Peeplcoach, and Amantha Imber from Inventium, founder of Inventium, joins me today as a very special guest. But just before we crack into what should be a pretty exciting session, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on personally in the Kulin Nation. And I know Amantha's joining me from that broad region as well. And acknowledge leaders emerging and future around what is probably a very broad geographical spread of people joining us today. So excited to be joining Amantha. I've seen Amantha present in the past, so it's an exciting session. And even though meetings might sound like a boring topic, I'm pretty sure by the end of this session, you'll be getting some real value out of it. So welcome, Amantha.
So good to be here, James, and hello, everybody.
Awesome. I'm going to just crack straight into this, Amantha, and ask just a really broad question, but I'll also alert all of the people who are on the call because the number, we're actually kind of getting up towards 1,000 registrations for this event. So the only way we manage this effectively is through the chat box, which I'll be monitoring as host. So I'm going to kick off with a question, but I will be monitoring our chat box and directing questions to Amantha or addressing them myself throughout the call. But just to get things started, Amantha, why does this topic even matter? Why do we need to rethink how we run and attend meetings in the first place?
Good question. I mean, maybe we should just leave meetings as a necessary evil and just end the webinar here. Does anyone want to do that? No. Yep. Okay. So they matter. They matter so much. And it really, it saddens me as to how we just accept meetings as the thorn in our side of any given workday. So what I think is really interesting is that research into our overall satisfaction with our jobs suggests that how happy we are with the meetings that we're attending impacts 15% of that. That is a lot. So how happy we are with our job is very impacted by how happy we are with meetings. So if you want to be happier in your work and if you want your team to be happier, then you really need to care about meetings. The other thing I would add, James, is what a time suck meetings are. A lot of what I talk and write about is productivity tips, and the biggest time drain in the average desk worker's day is meetings. So we spend 21 and a half hours per week in meetings. That's the latest stat that I have read. And if you combine that with the average desk worker spending about 2 to 3 hours per day in their inbox, like meetings and email is pretty much a full-time job. So where on earth are we doing our actual job? So it really matters that making meetings count matters and also reducing time in meetings.
So I guess one lens to look at that for, it's alarming in terms of how much time you're not doing what you might think is your core job, given emails and meetings together. So I guess an obvious question is, how do you reduce the number of meetings you attend and open up more time to do maybe some really productive things outside of meetings? I guess one lens there is, what actually deserves or warrants having a meeting in your view?
It's a great question and great questions. So one of the people whose work I most admire in this space is Professor Stephen Rogelberg. I know Adam Grant, who many of you would be familiar with, describes Stephen as the world's expert on meetings. And I've had the chance to interview him a couple of times on my podcast, How I Work. And when I asked him this question, he said, meetings are best served where there's a lively debate to be had. But if you think about why most meetings exist, or I'd say why probably about 50% of meetings exist, it's purely for information sharing. And I would love to know just like what is resonating with all of you guys. There's a couple of hundred of you here, I think, at the moment. Like when you think about the breakdown of the meetings that you are attending every day, what percentage of those, just type it into the chat box, generally like for information sharing, like a work in progress kind of meeting or an updates meeting or whatever. Just type that percentage into the chat box because that is the most obvious place to make a cut. So something at Inventium when we're working with clients and we do so much around resetting meetings culture is we ask them, what do you default to in terms of communication? Do you default to synchronous communication, which is live communication like what we're doing now, assuming you're not watching back a recording, in which case it's not synchronous. But meetings are synchronous communication. We're live, we're on the spot, whereas there's also asynchronous communication, which is non-live. So that might be email or, for those watching a recording, that's asynchronous. And at Inventium, for example, we make the very deliberate decision to default to asynchronous communication. And James, we can get into ways that we do that. But if you make that as a deliberate choice rather than defaulting to synchronous live meetings, then you really start to change how many meetings you are in.
That's fascinating. Also, when I look at the percentages coming through the chat, it really underscores the point you're making. So obviously, I'm looking at a kind of 70 to 90% range that's the norm here that's coming through the chat box. And just for those of you who are joining us possibly a little late, so the question was, what percentage of the meetings you have are effectively information sharing as opposed to discussional or lively conversations? So pretty much the norm seems to be in the 70 to 90% bracket. And if, as Amantha says, actually over half our working week is in meetings, and then another quarter plus is in email canvassing, then I guess another obvious question is, if something doesn't warrant a meeting, how do we communicate effectively? And obviously with Peeplecoach, our programs are really centered on emerging and developing leaders, developing great leadership skills. Communication, effective communication is a huge part of that. So I might come in after you and share a view or two on that, Amantha. But in terms of what are alternative and effective ways of communicating to having a meeting?
Well, I can tell you what we do at Inventium, and because we always practice what we preach, what a lot of our clients do when we work with them on really transforming meetings culture. So one of the most common tools that we use, well, two actually, and I'm just going to paste links into the chat box to these. We use a tool called Loom a lot, and I'm looking off to the side because I'm just like pasting in a URL here. And we also, there we hang on, sorry. So we use a tool called Loom and we use a tool called Teller. And these are the best tools that I've come across for not just, instead of being in lots of meetings, just sending lots of emails, because, emails are pretty dull to read, and, AI is writing a lot of them these days, which makes them even more generic. So Loom is a tool that I would use, I reckon, every day. And this is a very low friction way to record either yourself on video or record you explaining something on your screen or going through a presentation or slides with you also on camera or you completely off camera. It's really, really simple to use. Teller, which I don't think is hyperlinked correctly, but anyway, you can copy and paste that into a browser. That's a slightly more... it's just got a little bit more editing capability if you want to make it look a little bit more fancy. So as an example, we, over the last couple of months at Inventium, have been going through strategy work, in preparation for the new financial year, which has obviously started. And, what is really tempting to do, like in my role as CEO, is to just call meetings with the whole team and go, here's the strategy, or here's what I'm thinking. What do you reckon? And instead, what I've been doing, and this is pretty typical of our ways of working, is I will record a Loom video on whatever part of the strategy that I'm working on. It will outline just basically the information that I want to share. Like if we're working on what are the company goals, I'll talk about, this is my thinking, this is what they're looking like right now. I'd like your feedback on this. And then I'll call a meeting to get people's feedback and questions. And it means that not only is the meeting more engaging and it's not me just like blah, blah, blahing at people, but it's a discussion. Like it's a lively discussion, just like Stephen Rogelberg recommends. And I can see that someone has said Loom isn't cheap. I would say, what is the cost of the meetings that you are attending. And I know, James, you've got some thoughts on this. I've seen in some organizations where if you calculate someone's average salary cost, you can calculate how much is a meeting actually costing you to run in real dollars. And I would say if you add that up, compared to a subscription to Loom, and no, I don't have shares. I'm not a part of the company. I just love it. I would say that you're probably going to be saving quite a bit of money.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess Peru's comment was Loom isn't cheap. He's put an alternative there in Teams or Zoom as clips. So sounds like he's referring to an alternative approach to the same outcome. I guess as what Amantha just said, same with us. We don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, as to which technology you use. But I guess this is all about how do we use emerging technologies, and no doubt there'll be more and more of them, that potentially save significant time and get as good, or in some cases, better results. I mean, the idea of sending a video, whatever the tech, maybe Loom, and then asking people to review it, and then having a far more effective meeting once everyone's reviewed that video. To me, as an example, I chair a not-for-profit board, and one of the things I noticed when I joined that board is how people would effectively be spending an hour and a half in a meeting, and most of the meeting was actually conveying what was in the board papers that was sent prior to the meeting. So I think this probably raises another question, I guess, for me, and that is, as a leader, it's okay. In fact, I would say it's effective to lay out your expectations when you call a meeting on what you expect attendees to do prior to the meeting, like read the information, review the Loom video, and then to have a very clear purpose of what the meeting will actually do. And coming right back to Amantha's initial point, that meeting should be lively discussion or something that can't simply be just information sharing. So setting the ground rules, setting the expectation of the purpose of the meeting, and also having that preparation so the meeting itself is far more effective. I think are key things we see leaders struggle with, if I'm honest.
And James, I might just build on that. A really simple framework that we use and teach at Inventium, we call it PAO. It stands for Purpose, Agenda, Outcomes. And we and a lot of our clients now say, no PAO, no wayo. So if you are setting a meeting, make sure that in that calendar invite, you are saying, what is the purpose of this meeting? Are we meeting to make a decision? Are we meeting to generate solutions to a problem? Are we meeting to debate this, approach to strategy? What is the purpose? Then what is the agenda? Ideally, 3 to 5 dot points is all you need. And just as a bonus tip, if you can frame those agenda dot points as questions, you will get a much better quality of thinking, because agenda dot points, boring. Questions promote intrigue and curiosity and, us thinking about things. And then finally, what are the outcomes that you want to leave with this meeting with? Do you want 5 potential solutions to this problem? Do you want to have made a clear decision on, which applicant to recruit into this role? Like, what is the outcome that you will know when you've hit that outcome? We can just call an end to this meeting. What I really love, sometimes when we do work around meetings culture at Inventium, we're able to work, across an entire department or sometimes across an entire organization. And if you start to do something as simple as having the PAO rule, where you cannot set a meeting without a PAO, firstly, there'll be less meetings because it's a slight pain in the ass to actually think of a PAO and put that in the calendar invite. So it just creates friction in the way of inviting people to a meeting, putting a meeting in the diary. But also, if you implement the rule that if there's no PAO in a calendar invite, then you are welcome to decline it. It means you'll be attending less meetings. So no PAO, no wayo.
Awesome. I noticed there's a comment or two about what technology certain organisations have access to, particularly government organisations might have heavier restrictions in terms of access and budgets than certain other types of organisations. So I guess I'd acknowledge there's differences in access to different technical solutions. I guess what I'd say to that, and Amantha, interested in your view here, is we're all inundated with, I guess, how AI is being introduced to the planet and how that works for good or for not so good in certain situations. But I guess my view on that would be what are the problems you're trying to solve in terms of your meeting culture, and how could you go about it? And then, what technologies are actually available to support that? And maybe AI is a way to investigate those technical or technological tools that could potentially be useful. I know personally, I would say I was late to the party in really using AI in my day-to-day life, but doing a really specific query on, I work for Australian government clients and I'm looking for a tool that does X, Y, and Z in terms of meetings. I guess, in my opinion, it's likely you're going to be getting to a solution that's better than the current status quo of your meeting culture. Anything to add there? I guess possibly a segue into AI as well, Amantha.
I would love to know, just in the chat box, who has been using AI in some way, shape, or form to improve their meetings, and if so, how are you using that? Just type that into the chat box because I'm keen to see what people are doing. I think and Gen AI, I'd say I was very early to the party, and at Inventium, probably about half of our work now is actually building AI fluency and capability for our clients. But I think that the question that we're not asking enough with AI, because I think, I imagine we probably had some AI note takers join us as participants. And, a lot of meetings are now, recorded using Teams or Zoom or, the inbuilt AI function. But the most important question to ask yourself is, will recording this meeting with my AI recorder change the outcomes of this meeting? And if the answer is it will change them in a good way, like it will make it easier to document the minutes, the actions, distribute all those things that, previously, might take someone half an hour to do, then great. But sometimes recording a meeting using AI changes the outcome for the worse. It might reduce psychological safety. It might reduce the openness and liveliness of debate. It might breach confidentiality or make people worried about who else will watch this video, in which case make the decision to not record the meeting or to not invite your Otter AI note taker to the meeting. So we really need to be thinking more critically about that. Software that I use, we're a Microsoft organization. We use Teams. I will record some meetings with Teams so I can get a good AI summary. But other times, again, I'm going to talk about tools that some probably about 10 or 20% of people are like, stop recommending tools that my IT department doesn't let me use. But I'm going to do it anyway for those that can, because I think these are really useful. So I'm just going to paste this into the chat box. And what I will do is after this, I will actually send around an email to everyone, just with some resources. Oops, sorry, meant to do a line break there. 2 different resources there. So if you're on the Google ecosystem for business, Granola is a really brilliant AI note taker that doesn't actually record audio or video. It just writes a transcript, which reduces a lot of those issues with psychological safety and feeling like you're being watched or recorded, because it's purely a transcript. I should add legally, depending on your state, you should just ask consent to record something, but if you're just doing a transcript, slightly different. Hypernote is a different version of Granola. It is open source. It will work with anything. And it actually, all the data sits on your computer as opposed to going to some, data center in who knows where. So that's also an option, which I believe is free. So I do believe that AI has a really important role to play in meetings, in preparing for meetings well. It's a great research assistant. It's great at helping you shape up an agenda. It's great at, perhaps analyzing data from previous meetings to look for where are the themes, what are the discussions that I need to close the loop on or whatever. If you feed in a transcript, it's obviously great for during the meeting, for recording where appropriate, and it's also great post-meeting. So I'll pause there, but I'm, also really curious as to what questions people might have around meetings or around, meetings and AI, and, what perhaps is coming up for people as well as James and I talk.
Yeah, so I've noticed there's a lot of comments in the chat box around what people are using, what they're using that technology for, which is a great share for other participants in the masterclass. Again, just a reminder, if you've got specific questions for Amantha or myself, please feel free to put them in the chat box as well. We'll try and do that sequentially from asking for your broad answers to questions, so your questions aren't buried in a whole lot of answers from the broader audience. But just while we're looking and potentially waiting for some questions to come through from you, going from very advanced technology to very basic technology with this question, Amantha, but something that's been around for a long time now is Outlook and email and calendars, etc. I actually remember quite a number of years ago, it was you that alerted me to the fact that Microsoft's calendar defaults to 30-minute increments when you set up a meeting. Maybe you could share what you shared with me a few years back, and that was, what's the problem with a calendar defaulting to 30-minute increments?
Yes. So I'm going to imagine that for the majority of you people on this call, your average meeting length is either 30 minutes or 60 minutes. If that is not the case, I want to hear from you in the chat, but I'm going to assume, having asked this question of many, many thousands of people over the years, it's probably 30 or 60 minutes. So the problem with that is, if you think about Parkinson's law, which states that work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. So if a meeting is set to go for, I love it, all these people are like, no, not me, I'm different, which is great. I love that. Sorry.
I've seen the light. Yeah.
That's amazing. And now we're going to have like 200 responses to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if you have set 60 minutes for a meeting, I can almost guarantee you that time will fill that 60 minutes, regardless of whether that meeting actually deserves 60 minutes. So the better question to ask when you are setting a meeting is, how much time does this meeting deserve? So how much time does this meeting deserve? Like, is this a quick reversible decision that we can backtrack on, in which case it maybe only deserves 10 or 15 minutes for that meeting. But if this is a high stakes, irreversible decision, about our growth strategy or people strategy or whatever it might be, maybe that actually deserves 75 minutes or 80 minutes. So really think about that rather than defaulting to how digital calendars have been designed. And I'm glad that some people have figured out the speedy meetings setting. That is a setting in GCal and also in Outlook. And if you just search for that on Perplexity or however you're searching for things these days, you will quickly find out how to do that.
Fantastic. There was a really interesting question coming way away from all of our technology focus right now. And I guess this is where we thought Amantha's science-based approach to meetings and Peeplcoach's focus on leadership really intersect nicely. So there was a question a few pages up on my screen around introverts and extroverts in meetings. And I guess we can do so much with technology. We can use so many efficiency tools, but there could be an argument that actually the more efficient and swift we are with our meetings, it could even further exacerbate the problem where introverts are not heard in meetings. They don't interrupt that speedy flow. I guess one thing I'd sort of push pretty strongly here is when you're a leader, a couple of things occur to me around this meeting culture. One is your job is to make sure that when you have a meeting of your team members, they bring their value into that meeting, and the solution that comes out of it is independent of their personality type, i.e. introvert, extrovert. It's not an easy thing to execute, and that's why effective communication is a huge part of our leadership programs for emerging and developing leaders. So you get into really good habits early in your leadership career about actually including people who might have actually the best suggestions and solutions in your team, but are the least loud. And conversely, you need some effective methods to make sure respectfully you quieten down some of the very loud voices that might be drowning out the introverts. I think one thing I would add to all of that is, in my experience, and I guess I come from a large corporate, this is before a co-founder role at Peeplcoach, but my background prior to that was generally in large corporations with lots and lots and lots of people, lots of employees, lots of meetings. I guess I also see that sometimes meetings happen because you're not dealing with something really tough in a one-to-one discussion. You're not necessarily challenging something in another forum. And so you bring a whole lot of people into a meeting and you're trying to resolve something that actually just needed a really hard, difficult discussion somewhere else. Now, one method we're very big on at Peeplecoach in our programs is Kim Scott's radical candor, where concurrently, it sounds very easy to do, but it's very hard to execute. Concurrently, you challenge directly and care personally at the same time. And so I'm raising this because I believe if you've got a culture and your leaders are driving radical candor, where you're addressing really difficult issues in a way that's demonstrating personal care, however, also challenges directly on what that issue is, you're less likely to find a whole lot of pretty ineffective meetings that circle about on a very challenging topic that actually might not need a big meeting. So there's probably two things there. One is your role as a leader, any leaders on this call, in my view, it is to make sure that you facilitate meetings in a way to bring out the quieter voices and potentially quieten down some of the loud voices. And secondly, are you having meetings because it's a safe space to hide behind a tough issue that you're actually not addressing in another forum? So that's I guess, my experience in terms of where some of our client organisations are challenged, and my own experience in terms of leadership. Amantha, anything to add on that front?
Yeah. So I think it's such a great question, and it's really important to think about, because the percentage of people that are highly extroverted and very comfortable just thinking and then immediately talking is probably the minority of your organization or your team. So one of the best ways we have found to overcome this problem of you're not hearing the best thoughts from everyone on your team if you are just running meetings live and sharing the thing that you want people's opinions on there and then and expecting an instant response. That is how most meetings run, and that's really problematic. What we recommend to our clients and teach our clients is a tool that we call shifting, where if you are coming together to elicit views on a topic or generate ideas around a problem, what we say is get people thinking on their own first. So give people about 5 minutes thereabouts to capture their own thoughts, get their own thoughts together, and then shift into the group and give people the opportunity to take it in turns to share their thinking and then build on each other's thinking. We use that technique a lot when we're running ideation sessions for our clients, brainstorming sessions, but it's also a really good tool to use in meetings. And if you want to take it even further, obviously mentioned, asynchronous communication for information sharing is really important. And, if you can, use the recording function in PowerPoint, which is, totally fine, works really well, or Loom or whatever, or, hey, just grab your mobile phone and videotape yourself. Send people what you want people's thoughts on prior to the meeting, so they've got a few days to think about it. And you will get a much richer quality of thinking, and people will feel like they have the chance to be heard.
That's great. I guess it really brought me back when you were speaking then about when I am an extrovert, and when I was first a leader, I probably had a view that listening equals not talking. And that's not true. Listening, and I'm waiting until I get to say the right thing or the best idea in the room. Now, this is probably when I was very young, as people can see with the greys. I'm not very young anymore. I like to think I've matured a little bit. So I guess there's an intent piece to that as well. If you are facilitating a meeting, if you have the intent to actually leave the meeting with the best possible solution from a diverse group of people in the meeting, your actions will follow your intent. Actually, the organisation I spent 16 years at was Honeywell, and my last position there was running Asia Pacific. I was lucky enough to work under the global CEO there for 15 of my 16 years with a guy called Dave Cody. And he used to say, and think about this, I think there are 130,000 employees at the time at Honeywell, and 150 billion market cap organisation. And he would say his job as CEO is to not have the best answer at the start of the meeting, but to walk out of the meeting with the best answer. That's that statement of intent. You need to extract the best ideas from your team members as opposed to be quiet until it's your turn to talk. And I know that sounds simple, but the number of times when we're facilitating leadership forums, etc., the number of times you see very extroverted leaders make that mistake, you can see they're waiting to speak as opposed to actively listening. Interestingly, there was a question about Jeff Bezos, the 6-page strategy there. Amantha, there was a question over, I guess, is that still a valid strategy? I think the comment was it seemed to work for Jeff Bezos at Amazon. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I personally love that strategy. For those that have no idea what we're talking about, I believe that Amazon still do this. There's a no PowerPoint deck policy. I think Atlassian have something similar. A few organizations do. So instead, what you have to do, like for example, if you are, presenting the new strategy for your, category segment or geographic segment or whatever the case may be, is that you're basically constrained to get that thinking into a 6-page narrative. So it's not just like a 6-page brain dump. It's like it's a narrative. It's a story, and it's 6 pages. And I think there's even like a font size and other constraints so that you can't like cheat the system and do 6-point font. So I like what I love about that is that firstly, it forces people to think. I think that like the corporate world particularly, it really favors people, regardless of whether you're extroverted or introverted, but people who are really good oral communicators and very confident with oral communication, because you can wing or bluff your way through many, many things. But the 6-page strategy, document strategy is really good because it forces everyone to think and it puts everyone on a level playing field. Then sometimes what they do at Amazon is they'll give people 10-15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to read the document, again, to put everyone on the same playing field. You've all got the same information, you can think about it, and then you have a discussion around it. So, I love that. It's a really inclusive way of doing things, and, love like it puts people on a level playing field, and I love the constraints that it introduces.
Anything to add, Amantha? You mentioned asynchronous communication versus synchronous communication. Just for the benefit of a pretty large audience, synchronous, and some people joining us late. So synchronous is when things happen together at the same time. So this meeting is synchronous. Asynchronous is where you have people taking on that information at different times, potentially in their own at their own pace. Anything you wanted to maybe expand on how we could potentially, in some situations, not be doing everything in synchronous meetings, different techniques in that regard in terms of, particularly, I'm guessing, around information sharing.
Yeah. Look, I think, really, and again, like if you joined us slightly late, one of the things I think is really important to reflect on is what is the default in your organization when it comes to communication? Do you default to synchronous / live communication, or do you default to asynchronous? So at Inventium, we made the very deliberate choice that we default to asynchronous. That is our go-to. Calling meetings, it better be special. There better be something like, aside from one-on-ones, which we can talk about. That is a whole other category of meetings, one-on-ones, which, hasn't really come up yet. We're very deliberate about how we use our time in meetings. And I'd say, like, if I look at my calendar in terms of internal meetings, and we're a remote first organization, which means that communication is even more important because we're not co-located. I would probably have, 4 hours or less of internal meetings per week. That would be pretty normal. And I think that's pretty low compared to a lot of other people.
So a couple of things related to that, I think. So the one-to-ones, I'd like to kind of put that on the agenda right now and possibly get some feedback and questions from the audience. So I mentioned my roles back where there was a very, very large organisation that I was leading. What I developed over the years and realised I had to develop was what I would call a management operating system or a personal operating system, where you're extremely purposeful about what am I needing to achieve in my role and as an organization that you're leading? And what are the most critical meetings to have throughout the course of the year? What frequency, what duration, etc., and with who? And for me, what used to be called in I guess American corporate culture was skip level meetings. So if I'm running Asia Pacific and my direct reports are the country leader of China or India, etc., when I'm traveling, am I having any one-to-ones with people outside of the most senior leaders? The massive risk, and you can, by the way, that concept is scalable. Anyone sitting here who's thinking, well, I'm a leader with, in a far smaller organization in a less senior role, the concept is if you only listen to your direct reports or even a subset of your direct reports, you actually don't have your finger on the pulse as to what's really going on in the organization. And if I combine that with Amantha's comment that our organizations often suit the best oral communicators. Now, imagine when you start managing cross-cultural, cross-lingual teams, multilingual teams, you end up to the point where potentially someone whose English is better but is less effective as a leader is impressing you more when they speak to you than someone who's doing a far better job in the business, but their language skills are lower. So I guess the point I'm making is, for me, I always sort of say leadership is primarily the craft of creating fellowship. And if you're going to be a great leader, you need to have quite a number of one-to-one meetings to make that personal connection, to get a real pulse of what's happening in the organization. What are people pissed off about? What are they really happy about? What are they expecting from leadership, etc.? So I guess what I'd put out there is it's probably even more a reason, therefore, to get really, really time efficient around what other meetings you accept to allow the time for personal connection in the business, especially if you're a leader. So that could mean saying no or really steering clear of certain meetings to give yourself the space and time to generate fellowship as a leader with that personal connection. Amantha, anything you want to add on the one-to-one versus group team meetings?
Yeah, and I'm just reading people's questions as they come through. I note the one on alcohols on meetings. I'm not going to say that that's a great strategy, but what I will say though, I get your point that people are a little bit looser with alcohol. At Inventium, we say no to drugs. But what is really important to know is when our brain is at its sharpest, and importantly, when it comes to problem solving, when our brain is at its least vigilant, as psychologists call it. So it's got like the least barriers up. And what we know is for almost all types of people or chronotypes, that's typically in the early afternoon between about 1 and 3. So perhaps in place of alcohol, you might want to think about, if you want people's loosest thinking, that kind of and psychologists also call it the post-lunch dip, is when our energy wanes, our thinking's a bit foggier. You will actually get increased creativity at that time of day. So just want to make a note on that.
A bit of science there.
Yeah, there's science there. Yeah, and look, in terms of one-on-ones, I think a lot of the time they're done very poorly. They're a bit of a tick box exercise. And look, I also meet many leaders that don't even do one-on-ones or have one-on-ones. So there's that whole segment as well. But for me in my role, I think one-on-ones are very, very critical. And I think it's really important that we actually think about what is the purpose of a one-on-one. And I would love to know, like, again, in the chat, has anyone really deeply thought about that as opposed to just defaulting to putting recurring one-on-ones in their diary? Like, what is the actual purpose of one-on-ones? And does that reflect how your one-on-ones run? So I'd love any reflections that people have on that. But just, from what we know from research, most one-on-ones and the majority of time spent in one-on-ones is very transactional. It's like, how's this project going? What's happening there? Where's that at? Where's this at? Have you spoken to blah? What's happening there? Very, very transactional. And that's fine. There's a role for transactional, but you're missing a massive opportunity if I would say at least 50% of your one-on-one time should be strategic. It should be longer term discussion. It should be coaching oriented. It should be development oriented. It should be looking at the long term. It's something that I try to keep in mind for my one-on-ones. I don't always hit that. But another, a ritual that we have at Inventium that does help gear me to that is that we have a quarterly rhythm where every quarter the one-on-ones will they'll go for an hour, and they will be deliberately very long-term thinking. So we have what we call quarterly self-reflections, where I will send a bunch of questions that align with our guiding principles at Inventium for my direct reports to be thinking about in preparation. Get some reflecting on like what's happened over the past quarter. What have they learned? What are they looking forward to? Different questions. And if anyone wants them, just like hit me up. And then what we do, and this is a recent ritual that we've started that is an annual ritual, is instead of doing exit interviews, which quite frankly are a big waste of time in my opinion, generally in the ones that I've done or that my staff have done, nothing new has come up. And, and also like if they're a bad leaver as opposed to a good leaver, if they've been retrenched or fired as opposed to, leaving because they want their next career opportunity, you're going to get stuff that's not particularly constructive. So what we do, or what I personally do, is now I will do annual stay interviews. And this is asking someone before it's too late, like before you have someone amazing going, I'm going to hop over to this organization for blah reason. You actually get them to sit down and reflect, like, what do they love about their job? What do they find most meaningful and purposeful? What would tempt them to look for another job? What would push them to look for another job? And again, like if you want those questions for what I ask in the stay interviews, again, happy to share those. I might even put all those together like in a bit of a resource. Again, I'll share like a bit of a mega email with different resources that I'm mentioning here, if that's helpful.
Great. Thanks, Samantha. Just a few questions that have come in as we've been speaking. So there was a question about, I guess, the one-to-ones and how that relates, the value that I placed on them, how that relates to, I think, a virtual environment as well as I guess, in real life environment. How do you go about those? So I guess my view is I would say that there's a reality that it is easier to extract, certain emotional feedback, certain reality from a live face-to-face meeting. But there's also huge benefits in allowing for people to work remotely. So it is a trade-off to some extent. I would just go back to purpose. And if you're clear on what your purpose is of that discussion, whether it's a stay meeting using Amantha's terminology, or whatever else you want to deal with in that one-to-one, even if it is virtual, like so many meetings are right now, it really does come back to that that purpose that you have for that meeting, as opposed to just stumbling into a meeting and asking how the person is. A couple of other quick things I'd throw on the table that we, obviously do a fair bit of work with emerging and developing leaders on our programs for. One I would say is in your one-to-ones, I guess you really probably want to delve more into a coaching style than a directive or managerial style. So there are actually, if you just literally Google good coaching questions, they're open-ended questions. If you want to hear what someone's got to say in a one-to-one about how they're feeling about that strategic issue or how they're feeling about the organisation and the culture, if you ask them a closed question like, oh, are you enjoying it here at Peeplcoach? They are forced into a yes or no answer, and that discussion ends that second. If you say, tell me about how you're feeling around Peeplcoach now that you've been here 3 months, it's an open question. You're inviting discussion and feedback. You can ask another open question, get further feedback. So being clear, and again, it comes down to purpose, being clear on the fact you want feedback from that person. That's one of the purposes of the meeting. Then clearly you need to configure some open-ended questions as opposed to closed questions. And we would say that's more of a coaching style of leadership rather than a managing style of leadership, which is more around, hey, I'd like you to do X, Y, and Z, which is very much directional. I Another thing that's very much a leadership skill that relates to meetings, in my experience, Amantha, is a constructive and an effective way to say no to a meeting invitation. And my belief is you can do that at any level in the organisation, but as a leader, you can also, by doing that, start to change the culture around meetings in your organisation. I might kick that off by just sharing a couple of views. So there are actually multiple ways you can say no to attending a meeting. One can be, I'm unavailable because you actually, and this could be because you don't actually see the value, and you might make a big call on that and decline the meeting and see what response you get. Another one might be, hey, I'm unavailable for this meeting, or I'm not going to attend the meeting, but here are the 3 points I'd like to give you as input into the meeting. And if there is a keynote summary, a recording, or a Loom video, or whatever it might be, out of the meeting, I'd love to receive it. So I guess the final one I'd raise, and this is probably my favourite for any leaders out there developing your leadership skills, is if you have team members and some of those team members have aspirations for leadership roles themselves, there is a great opportunity to decline a meeting and send your team member into that meeting to represent you, to add value, to come away with their insights and give you a debrief on those. So it obviously kills two birds with one stone. On one hand, you've just saved yourself 1 hour or 30 minutes or 40 or 50 minutes of your schedule by declining the meeting and having one of your team members attend. The second thing you're doing is you are exposing your team member to something that is new, potentially uncomfortable, challenging, and your team member grows as a leader through that exposure. So there's a few things that I feel are underutilized by many leaders. I think a lot of people just automatically, almost autopilot, accept all the meetings they're invited to. And going right back to the start of the call where Amantha says 26 hours of your 40-hour week are taken up by meetings, or whatever that number was, I guess you're going to have to say no to some, and you're going to need to do it in a really effective way if you want that number to reduce. Amantha, thoughts on saying no?
Yes, I love that. Productivity gurus would say that the most important word for productivity is no, and we don't say it enough. I love your tips there, James. One that I would add, so for those that were on the call at the beginning or towards the beginning, you remember PAO, purpose, agenda, outcomes. If that is not in the meeting invite, what I recommend people do is write to the email organizer and go, just so I can work out whether this meeting is a good use of my time, can you tell me what the purpose, agenda, outcomes are going to be? And just a final build on that, what role do you want me to play in the meeting? And if you're not getting good answers to those things, then why would you spend your time in that meeting? I find that can be a useful line of questioning. So PAO, ask about purpose, agenda, outcome, and then fourth, what role do you want me to play in the meeting? And
Excellent.
Most of the time, they will not have a good answer. Sit there and observe and shut up and listen to me, which is not a reason to attend a meeting. I also think that just, politely saying, sorry, I can't attend, but I'd love to watch a recording, so can you please record it, is also just a very polite way of saying no.
It's funny you mentioned polite. So I guess I like to think we're very realistic at Peeplcoach when we're doing our programs and coaching leaders to develop. Politics exists. It's a reality. Organisations have hierarchies. Certain leaders are not very open-minded about change. Certain leaders are. So, when Amantha just said sometimes the polite way is to decline and ask for a presentation rather than saying, I don't see the value, boss, in attending your meeting. Of course, there's elements where you need judgment around the appropriate response. But I guess the truth of it is, based on the science Amantha's presented, the truth of it is, if you attend every meeting you're invited to, you're going to not get a lot done in the rest of the week unless you're working crazy hours, which of course brings us back to the whole work-life balance piece as well. I did like Stephen's humour there, basically saying, will there be a recording? I'd like to share this with some colleagues, and then made the observation that he'll be calling a meeting to sharing to share how to have effective meetings. But on a serious note, I did make.
Sorry, James. Just to jump in with that because I did read that as well. I appreciate that, Stephen. I've got Granola going in the background, which is recording a transcript of all of this. So I will share a Granola AI generated summary for the Cliff's Notes as well for people because it is a big ask, like watching a 1 hour recording. I do recognize that.
Yes. So between Inventium and Peeplcoach, we also will have some follow-up for any registration, any people that registered, whether they actually attended or not, around information covered in the session. So I'm sure you'll have the opportunity, Stephen, whether you want to call a meeting or find another creative way to impart that knowledge. We'll see how you went with today's masterclass. AI, we touched on it before, Amantha, but in terms of in the future, I guess my view of AI is, it can be used effectively. We touched on it a little bit before. I definitely have seen examples that have been, I guess, discussed in our leadership programs where people with all the best intentions start to embrace AI and they potentially get people offside. They don't actually achieve the outcome. In your view, I guess, is it as simple as AI is very much aligned to what is the purpose of the meeting? And, if you're not clear on that purpose, you're highly at risk of choosing the wrong method or approach.
Yeah, I mean, like my biggest fear, not my biggest fear, I have many fears, but I'm an AI optimist, is that I do see with some segments of the market that it is really reducing our ability to think critically. So if you are over-relying on AI, particularly Gen AI tools, I think it's very worthwhile just doing a critical thinking check. Am I still thinking things through? And, that does bring me back to the question that I mentioned earlier, that is the most critical question to answer if you are thinking of using AI to record a meeting is, will this change the outcome of the meeting? If the answer is yes, it will for the better, then by all means go for it. If it's going to make your life easier in terms of having a recording that you can share with others, that you can use for summarization or meetings capturing or looking at themes or, analyzing interpersonal dynamics, whatever you're using it for, then great. But if it is going to change the outcome for the worse, and as I mentioned before, like a really big one there is psychological safety. If people know that a meeting is being recorded with Gen AI, it's probably going to reduce psych safety, and it's probably going to reduce any kind of vulnerability that might need to come up, which is particularly important, like in one-on-ones or performance conversations. I know that there's probably a lot of HR people, probably a lot of conversations that HR people have probably shouldn't be recorded on AI. So it's really just about thinking what are the intended and unintended consequences of recording or using an AI note taker.
Yeah. I'd probably just add more broadly, the attendance of other people in a meeting impacts the nature of the meeting and the willingness of people to share the truth. And so, especially again, coming back to leaders on this call, if what you really want is the truth, even if it's the ugly truth of what's going on in your organization, I guess whether it's AI or in some cases, who do you invite to the meeting to extract the truth so that you can deal with the real issues and challenges in your organization? Amantha just mentioned the term unintended consequences. Now that's a term I use a lot in coaching. So there may be something that you're very clear you want to achieve, you've got a plan, but really thinking deeply, what are the unintended consequences of my particular course of action? And I would say that for every person or AI note taker you add to a forum, on average, I would say you're going to get less of the truth versus a very safe, purposefully constructed setting with the right open questions, not closed, to actually get to the truth. And once you get to the truth, you can then go into solution mode. So again, I do think it heavily comes back to PAO, Amantha's terminology around being very, very clear on the purpose, but your forum, the technology you do or choose not to use in a meeting has to relate to that outcome you're trying to achieve and the purpose of the meeting.
Mm.
Anything you're picking up here in the comments or the questions? There's a lot
yeah,
going on in the chat box.
I like and I'm also mindful of time. Where did the time go?
Yes.
Typical 60-minute meeting. Celia, I love what you said there. Treat AI as an intern. What we say in our Inventium Gen AI training is we say treat it as a grad on day one of the job. Like they're a grad, but it's day one of the job. They're so keen to please, and they're like, you've given them half the instructions, and they're often doing it, like doing the task without the full brief, and like that's the analogy that we use. So it's really important to think about. What I'm also going to do, I will be constructing in the next 24 hours a full email with all the resources that I've mentioned and a summary of the tools that we've covered. I'm also just putting my email into the chat box. I love answering individual questions, and if I can help with anyone's meeting culture, I always love a chat.
That's awesome. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up, but Amanda, I'm going to ask you to keep a bit of an eye out on the chat box in case something comes up last minute, because we're into the final 4 minutes. So one thing I was going to ask is Amanda to plonk her email in the chat, which is done, and that's her preferred method of contact if people want to get in touch with Amanda. For anything around leadership development programs at Peeplecoach, peeplecoach.com, that's P-E-E-P-L coach.com is probably the best way to check out our programs and get in touch with us. And we, I guess both Amanda and I really see this as a great intersection. How do you get really, really efficient using science-based approach to meetings and work, as well as how do you develop your leaders? Amanda's just touched on some of the resources. Again, we're going to coordinate as best as possible with the two organisations how to come back to everyone that's registered and make sure you've got tips, tricks, tools, and access to anything that might be helpful for you to run a far more effective, purposeful, and efficient organisation. So, Amanda, anything that strikes you before we give everyone an extra 2 minutes in their day?
I'm just looking at the comments, and it looks like this has been an hour well spent in a 60-minute meeting. So thank you, James, for such brilliant moderation.
Hey, thanks so much. We had a massive audience, and hopefully everyone got something out of it. But give us your feedback, and look forward to helping you along your way with some of these tips and tricks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Samantha.